Okay, so we're recording now, so we're good here. And this is just going to describe our project one that we have here. And I'll go through it um, from that standpoint. So I plan to have several of these presentations throughout the semester, and hopefully this is a good way to work. But I want to talk about our first project that we're going to do, and it's really set up that we have three projects. So the labs and what we do build towards a project, and so it reduces our work but builds towards something that is very useful to us. In the petroleum industry, if we look at the workflow from the petroleum industry, we go through a new location all the way to an abandoned location. And we start with trying to gather information along that way, where we might be using seismic surveys, geophysical rig moves, different operations. And we find that this is coming from the international oil and gas producers have found, and they put this together, that surveying and positioning integrity lasts across the whole way. So where you might have gathering this information or getting the lands and the rights appraisal to try to work on it, will come across, and you'll be using geodesy along the same way, and using spatial data along the same way, where the geophysical guys, they're not going to be dealing with building pads, building tanks, and putting things together, or is the reservoir engineer going to be worried about getting the land rights or getting seismic data in a basin setup? But data and survey will stretch across that whole area. So you have across the whole workflow a lot of people that are involved, and they do use GIS, but your aspect covers the whole way. So in doing that, what you really look at is that you want to build a foundation of the exploration production uh, uh, for supporting across that whole workflow. So what IOGP says, you want to do developing and discussing good practices, standards. That's the key thing. You want to they want to provide, and this is their idea, exchanging experience and knowledge among their organizations, supporting regulators and standard organizations, maintain industry standards and exchange format, and a good geodetic parameters. Of course, because of that surveying and positioning integrity, the geodetic is very important. And then liaisoning with other industry associations, throughout the workflow. You might be working with land people, again, in geophysical or petroleum engineers. So you're working across that whole area. And then you want to look at reducing risk management. The whole purpose is try to reduce our risk, our impact on the earth. Constantly looking for ways to improve this. You want to implement it across the full board, and you want to build it on a strong geodesy concept. The first thing you need to do to have a successful GIS implemented in a E&P type environment is you need to have governance. And what that means is you don't want to have a lot of standards and procedures and methodologies without having buy-in from all those different groups. So the key thing is to get buy-in from those people. Who are those people? They're people, in the line of this aspect who use GIS and use it for what they might do. So somebody up here in managing the assets in the field might not be concerned in geophysical work. So you need to get that person from the geophysical and that person from the operations together on a group. You need to form internally your organization to have a group. And you should meet regularly and have them define when you should meet. They should be part of the decision. They're not going to accept this unless they're part of the decision. And where should they be operating? Within their group and in the bigger part of the group. All right? And how should they be doing it is with a document that they contribute to and then get feedback even from their own people. And that leads us to the first project that we want to do. For the step one in starting this is you have to answer that regulatory. In my position that I went, one of the big reasons that BP needed me is that the regulatory requires us to turn in a lot of plats and documents in order for us to get permits to drill both in offshore and onshore. Those regulatory requirements gives me a good position to be in to try to go in and serve to do a product that has to be done. You must do this. So from that regulatory aspect, that is a good place to start of your must. In your project, you're going to go through and write a document. You need to have your shalls and must and should and coulds, right? What shall you do? Well, you shall do everything regulatory says. What must you do? You know, you must do what the governance group has agreed upon. What could you do? You could put minimum standards that you have. Now, all of your shalls and musts have a return on investment. Your coulds and mights have a big return on investment, and you have to try to define that and understand why are we doing this, okay? And then you want to write this in a workflow format. Start from the beginning and go through it as in a workflow format. Then you want to have acceptance. You want to say who is in charge, who is the person responsible. You want to set up that at the highest level that your vice president, your CEO, your presidents have approved this document and it is accepted and that it is enforcement throughout the way you work. Because if we try to hand data down the line and people don't want to collaborate, it becomes important. One of the first ways is that it starts is way back in procurement. A lot of people purchase geospatial data. They get contracts for somebody to go out and collect data, for example. They might need to have the process of going through and understanding in the procurement. If there's dollars that's going to be spent on data, data collection, or these things, the governance group needs to be involved in that. They need to have a say-so because you can't have somebody way over here thinking, well, it's my money, I'll just go spend it and do what I need to do to solve my problems. When you do that, you lose quite a bit in that scenario. Michael, your mic is kind of...
Yes, sir, just a minute. I'll figure out how to do it.
Okay. Now, if we go on to the next slide, what you'll be submitting for this document, and I have it lined out and I'll show you, we'll have what's called the minimum standards. You don't want to have a document that goes through every possible thing you need to do, dot every I and dot every T. You know, you might have statements that's really simple, like you will decide on a geodetic system. You will decide on what units to use. You will decide on where to store the data. You don't have to go through and explain exactly how they're going to store the data or exactly what they should be doing. But you should at least say you'll have these minimum standards, and then you can go to them and look and get that. You need to have some statements on what's the return on investment of doing this. Why is it good? What will be the true value? Will it reduce costs? Will it reduce risk? Will it improve areas? In the one that I developed when I was at BP, our vice president of drilling put me forward for what's called the Helios Award. And he said that the system that we set up improved spud to spud times at a 20 to 40% rate because of the way that we were using this method of sharing data across the whole board. And people were involved in the beginning and the end so that they knew what they could do instead of it getting handed to them and they had to deal with it. They were part of the solution at the beginning, and the people at the beginning were at the decision at the end. of the workflow. Have some examples. Have some examples of the way you want to see stuff used. Having some examples of the say you want to see things published. Give checklists. If you have some standard workflows, if you're going to go purchase some data, if you're going to go grab data off the internet, bring it in and add it to your thing, get some checklists. Have some methods. This should be done every so often. This should be looked at in this scenario. And then this document you have, you should have revisions. You should look at it once a year and try to do it from that standpoint. So that's just a quick overview of it. Let me go in and I'll show the actual lab and talk about it. So you're going to design standards and methods for managing an enterprise GIS. You should be able to define the regulatory requirements that are there. So the first thing you need to do is look at everything that you need to do in the GIS industry that are regulatory required. From the workflow from the very beginning, if you are going to do seismic, what are the regulatory requirements that require the use of GIS? If you're going to get land to do exploration, what are the requirements? If you're going to get a permit, what are the requirements? If you're going to build a pipeline, what are the permits for a pipeline? If you're going to build tanks on a facility, if you're going to storage, you're going to do a frac pond, we need to look at all those requirements and agencies from the federal, state, and local areas and try to summarize those and put those together. Then you build a series of technical standards and practices that are used in the industry. So you have PODs, you have PPDM, you have these IOGP, and I've listed several IOGP documents that are in our reading resources. Look at those. You don't have to rewrite those. You can direct and put in your document, you shall follow these standards or practices that are out there. Then you need to look at all the geospatial data sources, both that are externally and internally to your company, things that you have or things that you can go purchase it. If you're going and purchasing, you're bringing in, what is that procedure? What are those methodologies? What do you make sure occurs? What happens at the procurement level to the level where it goes into my GIS or my subsurface software or even on my cell phone, all right? Here's the outline of the document that you'll see. I'm not looking for a total complete document. I want you to get something started at your company and have some good starts. You need to go through and have a good introduction. Make a safety statement. Make a minimum standard statement. Make a regulatory statement. Make a geodetic statement. Make a when we are going to revise this. Make a statement of who's on the governance, who's going to be responsible for what roles and what they will do. And then make a value proposition that if we do this, we will reduce costs and impact to the earth. Define the terms that you think should be understood. Sometimes terms are not fully understood across the workflow. What we think a pipeline is might not be what somebody in another world thinks a pipeline is. So you have to define those key terms and how you use those, all right? Define 3 state and federal regulatory agencies that you use. So look at maybe Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, Ohio, California, whichever states. Try to look at least 3 states and have reference to their regulatory documents that they have. And then federal documents, whether it's the Bureau of Land Management's Gold Book or BOEM, the offshore group that looks at the offshore exploration. Define those regulatory things that you need to go to. And you might say in a simple statement, we will or we shall follow these standards and regulatory. And then what are the documents that have to be delivered to those regulatory, and what information can we get from those regulatory that comes back? Make a geodetic coordinate statements. What coordinate systems will all files be in? So a lot of it's in NAD 27. Okay, that's how we originally started off, and it's hard to move away from that. But a lot of people still use NAD 83, and a lot of surveyors and engineers use the more current NAD 83. We have a new one coming, NAD 2020, a new future coordinate reference system. That's going to change. How are we going to use that? What transformations and what conversions do we use? All right. So you need to define maybe the ones in the states that you talk about, and then you might want to define the units that you use. All right. So you want to go through there. And then again, the geospatial data. What data is there externally that we want to bring in? Maybe I want to bring in the state of Texas data here. Maybe I want to bring in IHS, DI, uh, P2 data. Maybe I'm bringing in several of these data sets, and I just say, if you bring these out, this is what I do with them. Now, what if they differ? What if IHS, DI, the state, and even what I think have a different location for that well? We had a project that we called the Master Well Project. We went through and said, this is the well location that we will all agree upon. And that was difficult for some areas because in their EDM database or in their other databases they might have a different coordinate. But you need to have a master coordinate. This is so you remove data uncertainty. All right, and you try to might not have a solution to which one you should use, but you might just say this needs to be addressed and how you want to go back and address it. So define a typical workflow for potential GIS projects. All right, so you might look at geology, land, surface, engineering, environmental, construction, operations, regulatory. Define those maybe as typical workflows even within their groups. Very small statements. Then you have a revision statement that says, okay, every year we're going to do a gap analysis and say, this is where we're at, this is where we want to be, here's where we want to get to, and we're going to look at these standards every so often from our governance group, and always have a return on investment. Why are we doing this? What value will it bring? Find some value that it will bring. Ask your governance group if you don't have one, or try to imagine the values that it would bring. And then appendices, things such as examples, how-to, naming conventions, checklists, procurements. You can have several things in your appendices that you feel like would be important. You get through, you have a final document. There's no page limit or anything that I'm looking for here. I can tell you, in having developed and done strategic planning and built these documents and user-defined practices, that you find that the minimum number of pages is always the best. You want to be short, succinct. Too much detail is too much to follow. You might just give authority, you shall do this, you shall do that. Maybe each group has its own geodesy statement, and you just say each group shall have its own geodesy statement. That might be fine enough. And then if you go to that group, you find out what their geodesy statement is. So this is our final project that we'll do at the end of these first three exercises that we have. And the three exercises, and I'll flip over to the page here on the canvas. The exercises that we have are set up in a way that they help to feed the information that we're doing, so that when we look at our modules and we're looking at understanding HSSC, our social responsibilities, bringing in data, looking at uncertainty, we're going to look at consumers and refineries. We're going to look at the end products. Consumers are driving our market. We're bringing that product to them. What data sets do they have? So we look at that. And then global mineral and surface ownership. We'll look at some of the global mineral and surface ownership aspects of the project for Module 3, and then submit our project. This will be a very light portion because we'll go into our project submittal from that standpoint. After that, I'll go through what Project 2 will be. Again, 3 sections for Project 2, then we'll have Project 3, and then 3 sections for Project 3. All right? So this Project 1, to summarize, is built to help you design standards and methods for managing enterprise GIS. We are working in reverse order from the consumer all the way back down to the geology. Standards and operations across those whole workflows will help everyone if you go to build these. This is a key element from that standpoint. What drives this? Finance, making money, return on investment, but number one, regulatory, limiting our impact on our environment to bring energy to the people of the earth from that standpoint. And that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer those. You can unmute your mic or just text me if you will, and I'll look for it and go from there. Any questions? Let me go here. I think I'm still have things here, and I'm still on.
Dr. Law, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I came in, as you know, about 10 minutes late. I apologize for that, but this obviously it says in front of the screen says project number 1, and what you went through for the first project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. It looks. I see it's a lot of stuff that I'm like all my fellow classmates have never done before, but it looks doable. But when you were talking about searching out all those things, I mean, do you think are we just going to be able to find that on the web, or I mean, how would you suggest us get started of finding those regulations and all that, yeah, for reference?
That's a great question. I will go through and put some of those out there for you, Michael, so that we'll have those available. That's one way of ones that I know about, right? But investigating some on your own is what I want you to try to go after. So searching the web is one way of doing it. You could even, you know, share the ones that you know about where you work at now within your company with pipelines. That could be very useful, you know, to put that in there, the regulatory elements that you know that you must follow. So you don't have to be all inclusive of every regulatory for every workflow, you know, but you might have it just focused to the ones you know, and then you make a general statement. Go look for the ones for geology, permit submittal, environmental, those things. But when you do pipelines, here's something very detailed that you should put. Does that help?
Yes, sir. It does. It does. Yeah, because we have we have an entire department just for regulatory, and I actually know a few of those people, so I could probably talk to them and get some ideas, you know. And also, it's a lot of their stuff is available on our company internet site. So.
All right, great, very good. I like that. Any other questions? Okay, well, continue on. I'm going to upload some more videos. My first video that I had is basically just reading over our first chapter in our book. I've uploaded the first chapter in the book. I'm going to be improving on the videos as I'm trying to expand how those work, and I think you'll see those change a little bit. But if you have any questions during the semester, just give me a call, and I appreciate everybody participating today. There's no more questions. We'll end it right here.
Thank you.